It used to be sort of hackers and the good guys, but now you have actual organized criminals involved, and that sort of skews the whole image. So trying to paint the hackers as bad guys doesn't work anymore, because there's actual real computer criminals doing this as a profession, not just as a hobby to see if they can break something.
Have you ever seen in your community people that showed a behavior which for you would mean that they cracked something, and you would tell them off, and you would tell the community to flame them, or to not let them in anymore?
No, but generally what you do is the community seems to be pretty self-correcting. It used to be more self-correcting than it is now, because in the old days you had to get a mentor, you had to have somebody to tutor you, and if somebody was untrustworthy, that could hurt your reputation if you were teaching them things. So word would spread very quickly if somebody was unreliable or untrustworthy. Nowadays, so much information is published online that you could become a hacker or a criminal and never have met anybody here. Everything's free and it's downloadable, and you can read and practice at home, and the operating system's free and internet's free and security tools are free, and so the need for socialization is no longer there. You can perform this all in your room and never meet a human. So some of the old ways of self-regulating are gone.
And the self-regulation, how would you say that happened 12 times in the 15 years, or hundreds of times?
What, the self-regulation? Yeah, it happens. It was a kind of a continuous thing. Somebody, you would have a hacking handle, and the hacking handle I've had for forever, 15, 16 years, because it's sort of your reputation and people trust that. And if your hacking handle changes all the time, people are going to be curious. Why do you keep changing your handle? Why do you need to change it?
So there's a quality assessment identity saying that I stayed on my records, I did this and this.
And you can ask anybody about me and they'll all tell you the same thing, because you've built this reputation. And a lot of the hacking world is reputation based. So, I mean, in the old days, what it used to be, if somebody was really crazy, somebody would call, not necessarily call the cops, but they'd call a phone company and tip them off that they were committing phone fraud. Or they would, and since it wasn't really a crime, well, the worst that would happen is somebody would get a phone call from the phone company and say, we know what you're up to, quit it. Mm-hmm. And that would scare them. Nowadays, I don't know what self-regulation would be, except just not revealing private information to them, not letting them into your small group of friends. Because there's so many other avenues now, they can get the information they need any other way.
So hacker for you, is that a historic term with a positive connotation?
Yeah, hacker to me is kind of, Stephen Levy wrote a book called Hackers in the 80s. And in it he described the original hackers of Silicon Valley that created the Apple computer and PDP and all these other original innovations. And originally a hacker was somebody who would solve problems that were sort of unsolvable, under time constraint, need to be fixed right now. And it doesn't need to be fixed in the best possible way, it just needs to work. So you call in your code a hacker. And he understands enough about all the different pieces of code that he can sort of cobble together a solution. He's sort of like a broad generalist.
That would be a workaround normally.
Yeah, he would be just a generalist that understood the whole system and could hack a solution together. And then later on, maybe specialists could clean it up. Yeah, so it was always a term of, you could be a software developer or a programmer, but it's a different thing to be a hacker, because that's a mentality. That's a way of approaching problems. That's a way of seeing how disparate objects kind of interrelate. And so the problem is, as criminals started to use computers to commit crimes, the press didn't have any other word to apply to it. Instead of using the phrase computer criminal, they borrowed this phrase out of the computer industry and applied hacker. Mm-hmm. And it's been impossible to fix that ever since. So, when you're at a hacker community, or when you're at a hacking event like this, we refer to each other, maybe he's a good hacker, or, oh, you see that, that was a really clever hack. But when you're talking to the general population, they don't understand that. So everybody's a security professional or a security consultant, but amongst ourselves.
And I heard some people trying to explain to me what TESO is. Can you explain it to me, and how you got to know?
What TESO is? It's just a hacking group. Yeah, European hacking group. There's been hacking groups since the dawn of time. Before the internet, there was X25 network, and there are hacking groups on X25 network, and dial-up modem hacking groups. And so they were a fairly successful group of very skilled hackers. They were active in the late 90s.
And what was their main, or what would they be knowledgeable for in the hacking community?
Back then, they had some of the brightest hackers, and they also didn't seem to make really any stupid mistakes. So they were really a tight group. There wasn't a lot of drama, and they didn't do anything too crazy. So if they broke into systems, they kept it to themselves. They didn't go ahead and share it with the world. And a lot of people respected the TESO members because they were so dedicated. That's sort of like, that was the kind of group a lot of other hackers wanted to be like.
So they were in a way disciplined, cunning. They were working together.
Yeah.
And I think even TESO members have been in the DeepSec here.
Yeah, I think so. Because they're still friends, even if they haven't been in TESO now for years. But it's like in the olden days, there was a group called the Legion of Doom, the LOD, that was very famous in the early 90s. And then there was a group that they did a lot of battling with called the MOD, the Masters of Destruction. And they fought all over the internet in the early days of the internet. And since then, there's been an innumerable amount of groups. You know, there's members here from THC, which is another hacking group. And I think, like I said, people want a sense of community. And small groups of highly focused hackers working together can achieve some really amazing things. A lot of the problems that we face now can't really be solved by a single person. It's too complicated. So there's almost a resurgence to sort of groups where, you know, the group can solve the problem, but individuals, it's almost too much to understand.
And is Black Hats a new form of self-organization, or is it a group as well?
No, it's purely just a social gathering. The whole point is, I think there's sort of two ways to build community. One is through having people listen to new information, be exposed to new ideas, and the other way is through meeting each other. And so with Black Hat, we try to do both. We try to have lots of social activities, because some people learn that way. We try to have a lot of presentations, new material. Some people learn that way. And really, all Black Hat was a way for me to have a real day job, to pay for me to live, and so I can continue to do DEF CON and other things I wanted. And in the early days of the internet, people who were going to DEF CON wanted to be able to have their companies pay for them to go to get them to Las Vegas. And so they said, make a professional show, charge us a bunch of money, and then I can sell that to my boss. But I can't sell my boss, you know, a hacking event. My boss isn't going to pay for that. And so it just happened to be a neat hack to get people to come to DEF CON was to start a professional show. I mean, that was my hack. And it turned out that that's the thing that's kept me alive. That turned into my job.
And, could we come now to explaining what Cisco is and what has been your relation to them in the last years?
Well, this was the Michael Lin and Cisco ISS lawsuit when they sued myself and Black Hat in 2005 and made it to the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
What is Cisco for the people that don't know?
Cisco, so the company Cisco is the largest manufacturer of equipment that's used to basically power the internet, the backbone of the internet. So when traffic moves around the world, generally it's moving along on Cisco equipment. So they're quite an influential company, and they're, you know, valued at tens of billions of dollars. And one of the people speaking at my show at Black Hat, Michael Lin, had found a vulnerability in the Cisco software that would allow him to basically take over any Cisco router.
Not very good.
No, because it powers basically probably 3/4 of the world. So theoretically, if he was a bad guy, he could have turned off the internet. If that, you know, that sounds like hyperbole, that sounds a little over the top, but in this case it was true. And Cisco didn't want him really talking about that. And his employer, ISS, was pressured by Cisco not to talk about it. And so what happened is he ended up getting up on stage and talked about it. And that didn't please anyone.
Which needed some courage?
I think so, yeah. He thought it through because he knew it was going to damage his career and he would be sued and there'd be all kinds of consequences. Nobody knew what the consequences would be, but he said he was going to give one talk, and he got up there and gave his original Cisco talk.
So it had to do with, for him, civil rights, or just with clever strategy to be the first to show it?
Well, I think part of it is he had done something nobody else had done, and it took him 9 months of work. just 9 months of work to get this to happen. And his company said he could speak on it 2 or 3 times. And at the last minute, they tried to say he couldn't speak on it. And he was he was upset about that, because this is everything he did. And then his company started saying, well, what he was talking about wasn't possible, because they were trying to calm down everybody, because word leaked that there's this vulnerability.
They told a hacker that he's making false claims, which is the worst thing you can say, huh?
Well, you're wrecking his reputation.
Yeah.
And that's like the only thing you really have as a hacker. And so I don't think that wasn't very well thought through.
By ISS.
Yeah, and so as Black Hat, we were sort of stuck in the middle between this argument between Cisco and ISS and Mike. And since we were the platform, we were the stage on which Mike was going to give this talk, they tried to pressure us, and they got a restraining order from a federal judge prohibiting us from distributing his materials. But they didn't prohibit us from allowing him to talk. So he ended up still giving his talk. None of the materials were handed out, but the information still got out there.
So no PowerPoint, but power words.
And the funny thing was, is people were sitting in the audience video recording the whole talk, and that information got out. And it's just, you can't bottle it. You know, the information got out. And the problem too was that ISS and Cisco had not thought through the PR, the press ramifications of this. So it's the most interesting story now. This big company trying to conceal a vulnerability. How long have they known about it? Why are they trying to conceal it? Why are they trying to muffle this person from speaking? And all of a sudden there's all these other issues involved that they had not thought of. And it did so much more damage to their credibility than them just letting him talk in the first place. If they took him seriously and said, yes, we know about the problem, yes, we fixed it, thank you, Mike, for pointing out the problem, it would have gone away. But because they tried to stifle it, it attracted all this attention from the internet. And all of a sudden, that was the story. The story was them trying to stifle the information.
And do you meet Cisco people now? Are they still angry with you, or? No.
The Cisco people are great. They're like business people, and they can look back on this and realize they made a mistake. And they can laugh about it, and they can say, we're not doing that again. But the ISS people, I think, took it a lot more personally. But the Cisco people, I've talked to their CSO, and I've talked to other people involved, and they're kind of embarrassed that it got that far out of control. But you have to realize this is sort of the first time this had ever happened. There was no playbook. Nobody knew how to do this. So when it happened, it was like everybody was learning on the fly. And I think it acted as a lesson. I don't think many other companies are going to try to stifle this.
Now, the way that hacker culture in my book moved to knowledge culture on the broader sense, moved into the questions of do we help the third world by the best knowledge to give them? Or just like in the 70s, to try to give them some technologies of the hardware. And in the last 5 years, I've been a bit looking at what changes there. What changed was that Wikipedia got very big, and sort of really hard code ecosystems of knowledge got more invaded by these soft code, I would call it, strategies of hackers, and then of the free software, and then the open source and sort of movement. And now in the last 3 years, you could see, and people tell that it's happened since 5 or 6 years, that even the money business, thinks that sharing is better to build a consumer base that you then commercialize on afterwards. So the world is toppling, or the normal commercial way to make money from IT and internet is in some areas, not in all, but in some areas really put from head to toe. Yeah. Now, first I would ask you, is that for you an interesting, or was it foreseeable development?
Well, two things. Hacker culture has always been about knowledge. And that's how I could be a member of the hacker community when I was 13 or 14, was because they didn't know how old I was. All they knew is what I typed on the keyboard. They didn't know my gender unless I told them. They didn't know my age unless I told them. So to me, as a 13-year-old, that was very powerful, because I couldn't drive a car, I couldn't drink alcohol, but I could be having conversations with these people, about sex and drugs and rock and roll. I mean, they just didn't know. And as long as I could communicate on their level, I could be their friends, and vice versa. And so that was very enabling. And so I think hackers have always tried to judge others basically on their knowledge, not really on their looks or their age, because in the early days, none of that mattered. You never saw these people because it was all done over dial-up.
Did that change a bit or not?
That's changed a bit because now that you